They say history is written by the victors. But some stories, some truths, are never meant to be written. Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story, it's a door. And once it opens, there's no turning back. It starts in a village swallowed by fog and superstition. The kind of place where the church tower looms over the crooked streets like a sentinel, where whispers in the night are louder than screams, and where a single accusation could be enough to end a life. A girl lived there, barely more than a child, but eyes like fire, and a spirit the villagers could not contain. She was different, too intelligent, too curious, and for that, they called her cursed. The accusations were subtle at first. A missed prayer, a shadow in the wrong place, a laugh that carried too far. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. They said she spoke to demons, that she carried knowledge that would unravel the very fabric of their lives. And when fear infects the human mind, reason disappears. One night, they dragged her from her home. The villagers gathered as if to witness a ritual, not a murder. Her hands were tied. Her feet scraped the dirt, leaving a trail of defiance behind her. They built a pyre. The flames waited like predators. And yet, even as the fire touched her skin, even as the smoke clawed at her lungs, she did not scream. Not in the way the world expected. Her eyes, they never closed. Those eyes, wide, unbroken, staring into eternity, became a mirror reflecting something forbidden, a knowledge that the villagers could not bear. They burned her body, believing it would burn the truth with it. They were wrong. Truth has a stubborn way of surviving. And in those eyes, in the stillness of her gaze, something eternal lingered. Something that whispers even now. And here's the secret most never realize. The fire that consumed her was not just a punishment. It was a warning. A lesson in control, in fear, in the lengths institutions, religious, political, social, will go to protect their power. That night, a system revealed itself. Not through words, but through action. And anyone who dares to look deeper will feel the same chill that ran through the villagers' spines. The kind of chill that lingers in the soul forever. They say the body dies, but the story lives. And some stories refuse to remain buried. After the pyre was extinguished, the villagers returned to their homes, shaking. Satan they had eradicated the problem. But the girl's presence lingered. Not as a ghost, at least not in the way children's tales describe, but as a memory embedded in the very stones of that village. Every creaking door, every whispering wind, every shadow that moved too quickly, they felt her gaze. And the more they tried to suppress it, the stronger it became. Power is fragile, especially when built on lies. Those who enforce it understand this instinctively. The fire was not just punishment, it was theater, a lesson carved in flesh and bone for anyone who might question the system. The church, the elders, the magistrates, they all understood something primal. Control is maintained not by truth, but by fear. And fear is most effective when it wears the mask of morality. What they didn't count on was the girl herself. Not as a body, not as a voice, but as an idea. Ideas cannot be chained, cannot be burned, cannot be silenced. They spread quietly, invisibly, from one mind to another, infiltrating dreams, thoughts, and even the rituals designed to eradicate them. Knowledge that challenges authority never disappears. It mutates, it hides, it waits. And here's where most fail to see the pattern. Every institution that claims purity, righteousness, or divine sanction has a shadow like this. Every secret council, every hidden ledger, every unspoken rule is a reminder that power always fears exposure. History is littered with these moments where a single individual, too aware, too alive, too lucid, is extinguished, and yet their awareness seeps through the cracks. And in those cracks, the truth grows. You may wonder what could have been in the girl's mind as the flames devoured her. Was she terrified? Did she pray? No. She stared. She watched. And in watching, she became a silent instructor, teaching those few who could truly see that the world is not as it seems, that institutions are not protectors, but manipulators, that control is always maintained by orchestrating fear, and obedience is often purchased with horror. And now, pay close attention. The ritual of power you just witnessed is still happening today. It's no longer pyres and public executions. The methods have changed, but the machinery is the same. Fear, manipulation, secrecy. These are the modern pyres. And if you refuse to look, you will feel the flames, without understanding why. Long after the village slept, the embers of the pyre still glowed like the dying heartbeat of a beast. The smoke drifted upward, curling into the night like a signal, silent, invisible to most, but unmistakable to those who understood how power communicates in shadows. For you must realize something now. Her death was not an isolated act of fae. It was part of a pattern older than kingdoms, older than scripture, older even than the idea of civilization itself. Every society, no matter its era or language, develops guardians of order. They may wear robes, crowns, armor, or titles. But beneath the costume, their purpose remains unchanged. Protect the narrative. Protect the story that sustains their authority. And in every age, anyone who sees too clearly becomes a threat. Legends say that the girl had uncovered something small, almost trivial, yet dangerous. Not a spell, not a curse, but a truth. A truth about how people are guided without knowing they are being guided. How fears can be planted like seeds. How beliefs can be shaped with rituals and repetition. She had begun to see the strings behind the theater, the whispered instructions behind every judgment passed in that village. And once a person sees the strings, they become uncontrollable. The elders sensed her awakening long before she sensed it in herself. They saw it in the way she questioned routine prayers, in the way she observed people instead of obeying them, in the way she watched the magistrate speak, not with reverence, but with curiosity, as if studying a mechanism. They recognized that look, the look of someone who has stepped outside the script. And here's a rule of power that has never changed. Authorities do not fear violence, rebellion, or sin the way they fear someone who thinks independently. Violence can be crushed. Rebels can be punished. But awareness is contagious. It spreads like fire, the one thing even stone walls cannot contain. So they acted swiftly, not because she was dangerous, but because her mind was beginning to escape them. Her execution was not justice, it was maintenance, a ritual cleansing of a narrative they needed to preserve. But they underestimated something. Awareness does not die when the body dies. It migrates. It imprints itself on those who witness it, who feel the wrongness of it in their bones, who sense, without knowing why, that a boundary has been crossed. And that is why her eyes never closed. Not out of defiance, not out of supernatural strength, but because she had already stepped into a truth they could not ban away. And once truth awakens in one's soul, it starts calling to others, including you. Think about this. What is more terrifying than fire? Not the heat, not the smoke, but the silence that follows. The stillness of a village that believes it has done the right thing. The quiet compliance of people who think they are safe because they obeyed orders. That silence is the echo of control, and it is louder than any scream. The girl's death became a signal, a lesson encoded into the collective mind. She was a warning to every observer. Curiosity will be punished. Awareness will be extinguished. Defiance will not be tolerated. And here's what they never tell you. These lessons are not delivered with logic. They are delivered with terror. Fear is the hammer. Obedience is the nail. And those who wield it expertly. Power rarely wears an obvious face. Often, it hides behind rituals, traditions, and what people call morality. It does not speak of control. It speaks of necessity. It does not admit manipulation. It whispers duty. And the deeper you look, the more terrifying it becomes. Systems are designed not to save humanity, but to ensure survival of their own structure. Individuals are irrelevant. Only the continuity of the machine matters. But the girl's awareness disrupted that machine. She saw the mechanism, the intricate web of influence, the subtle hierarchies, the invisible lines of command that governed every action. And in seeing, she became a threat. Knowledge, when it exposes the foundations of control, is more dangerous than any weapon. That is why her life had to end. Yet in ending her life, they made a fatal mistake. The mechanism of fear works only if people believe the story completely. But those who glimpse the truth, the faintest flicker of the machinery, cannot unsee it. Their minds become a battleground. Doubt takes root. Questions emerge. And in that fertile ground, forbidden knowledge grows. Now, imagine the ripple. One gale, burned in a village, becomes the seed of rebellion. Not armed rebellion, but mental, spiritual rebellion. The quiet insurgence of awareness. The awakening that the systems they trust are designed to bind them, to manipulate them, and to harvest their compliance. And the eyes of the girl, unblinking in the fire, are a symbol, not of defiance, but of seeing. Seeing what others refuse to see. Seeing the strings that tie them down. And here's your first choice. If you are still listening, write this phrase in the comments twice. I see the strings. Let it settle. Let it anchor you. The act is simple, but it signals something profound. You are no longer a passive observer. You are beginning to step outside the narrative. You are beginning to awaken. Long before her execution, long before the villagers sharpened their fear into a blade, there were whispers, quiet, fragmented hints of a hidden network guiding the decisions of that village. Not a council, not an order, not a cult. Something far simpler and far more dangerous. A pattern. A pattern that repeats wherever power gathers. People think control comes from rulers, laws, or doctrines. But the most effective control comes from something older than all of those. A shared belief that must never be questioned. A belief so deeply woven into daily life that it feels like air. Unseen, unquestioned, essential. In her village, that belief was fear of the unknown. In yours, it may have a different name, but the function is the same. Fear shapes behavior more efficiently than any decree. Fear keeps people aligned. Fear ensures the machine continues turning. And those who understand this, those who do not merely obey fear, but manufacture it, hold a kind of power that does not need a name. The girl sensed this long before they took her. She noticed how the elders held meetings behind closed doors whenever the harvest failed. How the magistrate walked the same path every night, checking the same windows, marking who stayed awake. How the prayers changed subtly from year to year, shifting tone, growing darker, heavier, more demanding. These details seemed unrelated, until she began connecting them. That was her crime. She saw the structure beneath the illusion. The hidden network was not a group of individuals, but a mindset, a collective agreement built upon shared fear. Fear of outsiders, fear of change, fear of anyone who asked too many questions. And because she had begun to ask those questions, the system responded like a cornered animal. It had to protect itself. Here's what most men never realize. Systems do not need to be evil to become oppressive. They simply need to prioritize their own survival over the truth, over individuals, over humanity. Once that happens, darkness grows naturally, like mold in a sealed room. Quiet, unchallenged, unnoticed, until someone opens a window. The girl was that window. Her clarity threatened the foundation of their belief. If she spread that clarity to others, if she taught them to see the invisible architecture of control, the entire structure would collapse. And structures do not collapse peacefully. So they silenced her. But they failed to silence the questions she triggered. Because here you are, centuries later, wondering the same thing she once wondered. If fear is the cage, who built the bars? And more importantly, why are you inside it? Ask yourself this. How do you control a mind without touching it? How do you shape behavior, beliefs, even loyalty, without anyone noticing the hands that guide them? The girl understood this instinctively, long before she was burned. She saw it in the patterns of the villagers, in their unquestioning obedience, in the way terror could be turned into ritual, and ritual into tradition. Control is not enforced through violence alone. Violence is too crude. True control is invisible. It is woven into language, into symbols, into the architecture of society itself. It whispers in sermons, hides in laws, and nests in customs so old that questioning them feels like blasphemy. And the girl saw it, every thread, every knot, every invisible chain. The fire was meant to erase her knowledge, to make the fear absolute. But the very act of her burning revealed another truth. Systems do not act for morality. They act for self-preservation. The elders, the priests, the magistrates, they were not just enforcers of law. They were guardians of a secret network of influence, a psychological architecture built to ensure compliance. And they could smell disruption. They could sense her awareness as a threat to the invisible order they maintained. And here's the terrifying part. You are surrounded by the same architecture today. Not in the form of pyres or inquisitions, but as institutions, rituals, and beliefs that shape your perception, your behavior, and even your desires. Schools, governments, corporations, religions, they are all instruments of the same principle. Keep the system running. Maintain control. Suppress awareness. Reward obedience. Punish curiosity. The girl understood this before they struck her down. She understood that fire could kill the body but could not burn the mind. That ideas are the true contagion. That awareness, once awakened, spreads silently from one person to another. And in that spread, power begins to tremble. Now, imagine for a moment the eyes of the girl, still wide, still unblinking, still observing the world even as her flesh smoked and blackened. Those eyes are warning, not of death, not of suffering, but of what happens when someone sees the machinery behind the world, when they step beyond fear, when they understand the strings. Once you see the strings, nothing is ever the same. And if you are listening, write this phrase twice in the comments. I walk beyond fear. Let it anchor you. Let it mark the point where passive observation ends and true awareness begins. Because what comes next is far darker. And you will need your courage, your clarity, and your willingness to see. Fear is not an accident. It is engineered, carefully measured, deployed with precision. The girl realized this in the weeks before her death, though she did not yet have a name for it. Every glance from the elders, every sermon, every whispered warning in the streets, it was not random. It was part of a system designed to shape minds, dictate behavior, and enforce conformity. The pyre was the apex, the culmination of decades of subtle conditioning. Before the fire, they had trained the villagers to respond automatically to symbols of authority, to obey rituals without thought, to turn suspicion into terror. By the time the girl was accused, she was swimming against currents that had been flowing for generations, currents so strong that most never even noticed them. And therein lies the secret the powerful have always known. Control is easiest when it is invisible. The mind that thinks it is free is often the most tightly bound. Systems are strongest when their chains are unseen. They do not announce themselves with banners or threats. They whisper. They hint. They reward compliance and punish curiosity in ways so subtle that people believe it is their own choice. The girl saw it, and that is why they feared her. Not because she could bang, not because she could resist, but because she had glimpsed the architecture of their power. She understood that obedience is cultivated, that fear is a tool, and that rituals are the scaffolding of tyranny. One person who understands the design can unravel the illusion for countless others. And this is why her death was ceremonial as much as punitive. The fire was not just punishment, it was a message. Every villager who watched, every child who witnessed, every mind that recorded the image of her unblinking eyes, they carried it. They carried a lesson. Look too closely, and you too will be consumed. But the girl's awareness had already spread. The fire could not reach ideas. The eyes that never closed had already infected the village with doubt, with curiosity, with a faint recognition that the world was orchestrated in ways no one dared speak aloud. Power always fears the unblinking gaze, the gaze that sees patterns where others see chaos, the gaze that questions when others obey. And so the mechanism of control reacts violently, swiftly, mercilessly. And now, listen carefully. The chains that bound the villages are mirrored in the structures around you today. Fear, ritual, obedience, and hidden rules, they are all still at work. And just as her gaze spread beyond her body, your awareness can pierce through the modern machinery of control. Power does not rely on strength alone. It relies on the mind, yours, mine, everyone's. And it tests that mind constantly. Before the girl was burned, she faced trials that seemed trivial, even mundane. A mispronounced prayer, a question asked at the wrong time, a glance that lingered too long. Each small act was measured, catalogued, interpreted. She did not yet understand that these were not mistakes, they were tests. Every society, every institution, every authority that has survived for centuries understands this principle. Obedience must be verified continuously. It is not enough for people to simply follow rules. Their compliance must be confirmed through ritualized scrutiny, subtle cues, and punishment calculated to reinforce the hierarchy. And those who fail the tests are marked, not just as threats, but as examples. The girl failed the tests because she refused them. She refused to play the game of silent acquiescence. And in refusing, she revealed the pattern. She exposed the mechanism that had controlled the village for generations. She illuminated the web of fear, ritual, and reward that bound the people together, without ever touching the law itself. Fear, it turns out, is only half of the equation. The other half is the subtle manipulation of desire. People are taught to want what the system wants, to value obedience, to see their conformity as virtue. And when someone steps outside that invisible contract, when someone desires truth instead of comfort, the system reacts as if survival itself is at stake. Her death was the ultimate test, broadcast as ritual, designed to ensure that no one else would dare step out of line. But here's the irony. Rituals of fear cannot suppress insight forever. Knowledge spreads silently. Questions multiply in whispers. Doubt grows like a root in the cracks of stone walls. And sometimes, the smallest spark, one unblinking gaze, can ignite the consciousness of an entire generation. This is the lesson the girl left behind. Power does not tolerate vision. It fears clarity. It punishes awareness. But it cannot kill what cannot be touched. And that is why her eyes never closed. Because once you see the system, once you understand the architecture of fear and ritual, your mind can never be bound again. And now, if you are truly following, write this phrase twice in the comments. I will see what others say. Let it anchor you. Let it signal the beginning of a transformation. The next revelations will take you deeper, into patterns older than empires, and truths far darker than any pyre. Look closely, and you will see a story repeating itself, not just in that village, not just in that century, but across time, across civilizations, across the very fabric of history. Every empire, every kingdom, every ruling order has faced the same dilemma. A mind that sees too clearly is a threat to their survival. And every time, they have acted to suppress it. The mechanisms have evolved. In some eras, it was fire. In others, imprisonment. Later, exile, torture, or public shaming. Today, it is subtler, quieter, yet far more pervasive: disinformation, manipulation of narrative, curated knowledge, and social pressure. The pyres have become algorithms. The elders have become institutions. The rituals have become systems of reward and punishment embedded in every interaction. But the principle is unchanged. Fear, ritual, obedience. Questions punished. Compliance rewarded. The unblinking gaze of awareness still terrifies those who rely on conformity. And the pattern is unmistakable. Look at the trials of Socrates, the accusations against women in Salem, the witch hunts in countless towns, the political purges of modern states. All echo the same truth. Control fears the awakened mind. Control fears the spark of insight. Her story is a symbol, a mirror reflecting the machinery that persists in every society. Those who pull the strings know this. They understand that the individual who thinks independently is the greatest threat to their structure. And they act accordingly, subtly, ruthlessly, invisibly. Fear is manufactured. Obedience is cultivated. Questions are extinguished. And the world moves forward as if these patterns do not exist, as if the eyes that never close can be ignored. Yet, history also carries a hidden lesson. For every mind they burn, for every soul they try to erase, awareness spreads. Questions that could not be asked aloud find fertile ground in silence. Doubt infects the unquestioning. And the mechanisms of control, no matter how well designed, are always vulnerable to one thing: observation. One person who sees. One person who refuses to look away. This is where the girl lives now. Not in her body, but in the act of seeing. She exists in the eyes of those who recognize patterns, who sense manipulation, who dare to ask, who is really in control, and why. And if you are listening, if you are still breathing while the world sleeps, that gaze is beginning to settle on you. The next sections will take you even deeper. We will dissect the architecture of fear, the hidden rituals of obedience, and the centuries of silence that built the scaffolding of modern control. The fire that consumed her body centuries ago was brutal, but it was predictable. Today, the methods are subtler, more insidious, and far more effective. The machinery of control has migrated from pyres and towers to newspapers, screens, social networks, and institutions that dictate thought without ever touching you physically. Fear is no longer screamed. It is curated. Obedience is no longer forced. It is normalized. Imagine a system designed not to govern through law, but through perception. Every headline, every advertisement, every carefully curated image, every repetition of a narrative reinforces compliance. Your mind becomes a battlefield you didn't know existed. And the operators of this machinery, though faceless, are no less real, no less strategic than the elders who once watched the girl burn. Her death was an early lesson in how society shaped behavior. The unblinking gaze of awareness was dangerous then. Today, that gaze is rare. Most eyes close without noticing the strings that bind them. Yet, those who refuse to look away, the ones who observe, question, and connect the patterns, pose the same threat to modern control structures as she did. And here's a truth many will resist. Control today is not enforced by overt punishment. It is enforced by subtle psychological mechanisms. Shame, reputation, exclusion, rewards for conformity, discomfort for dissent, algorithms that track behavior, messages that guide emotion, social systems that amplify obedience. The pyre has been replaced by screens and systems that condition minds with the precision of a surgeon. The girl's eyes never closed because she understood this principle instinctively. She realized that power is not in brute force. It is in shaping perception, limiting choice, and controlling narrative. And once the perception is shaped, the obedient will do the rest themselves. Fire is unnecessary when fear lives inside the mind. Chains are unnecessary when doubt is extinguished before it can form. Now, consider your own life. How many patterns, invisible but pervasive, guide your actions? How many rituals, customs, and beliefs have been shaped to maintain compliance rather than serve truth? The machinery is all around you, and it is far more sophisticated than anyone who burned her could have imagined. And if you are listening closely, if you want to step further beyond, prepare yourself. The next sections will show you not just the patterns of control, but the hidden logic, the architecture of obedience, that has spanned centuries and continues to influence every facet of modern life. Obedience is not natural. It is cultivated. It is engineered through repetition, reward, and the careful calibration of fear. The girl understood this intuitively long before her death, though she did not yet have the language to describe it. She saw it in the village's actions, the way they flinched at authority, the way they whispered in fear, the way they conformed without realizing why. Power understands the human mind better than most people understand themselves. It knows how to shape perception, manipulate desire, and suppress doubt. It uses rituals to normalize behavior, symbols to reinforce hierarchy, and stories to instill fear. Every step is calculated, every response anticipated. The system does not need violence to control. It needs structure, repetition, and subtle psychological nudges that make people obey willingly. The most effective tool is not the pyre. It is expectation. It is the belief that questioning will lead to pain, isolation, or disgrace. Once that belief takes root, compliance becomes automatic. Individuals police themselves. Communities enforce obedience internally. And the eyes that never close, the minds that see too clearly, become dangerous anomalies. The girl's awareness threatened the invisible scaffolding of authority. Her curiosity, her refusal to accept arbitrary rules, her clarity in seeing patterns, all of it exposed the fragility beneath the ritualistic structure. And so, the pyre became a warning, a public calibration of fear. It told everyone who witnessed it, step too far, and you will burn too. This is the architecture of control: observe, influence, enforce, and normalize. And it does not die with the girl. It survives in every institution that values order over truth, tradition over awareness, and obedience over insight. The patterns repeat because human psychology has not changed. Fear still dominates. Desire is still manipulated. Compliance is still rewarded. And now, imagine yourself in the same web. Every expectation you meet, every ritual you follow, every instinct you suppress, all of it is designed to maintain structures that benefit others, often at your expense. The unblinking eyes of the girl are a mirror for you. Do you see the strings? Do you see the invisible mechanisms that shape your thoughts and choices every day? The next sections will pull you deeper, revealing how these tools of obedience evolve, adapt, and persist across generations. Once you see them clearly, there is no turning back. Awareness becomes a responsibility, a weapon, and a curse all at once. Long before the pyres, before the priests, before the written word, humans organized themselves into hierarchies. Tribes, clans, and kingdoms understood a fundamental truth. Survival depends on cooperation, and cooperation depends on control. Those who could shape the beliefs, fears, and desires of others held unimaginable power. And they discovered early that the mind is far more pliable than the body. The girl's story, though centuries old, is a reflection of this ancestral pattern. Her awareness challenged the system because she saw beyond survival rituals. She perceived the invisible chains designed to enforce obedience, the subtle cues that dictated action, the psychology embedded in every tradition, every ceremony, every story told around the fire. Her insight was dangerous because it pierced the oldest mechanisms of control known to humanity. Consider the earliest leaders, shamans, and elders. They did not rely solely on force. They relied on myths, symbols, and fear. They understood that compliance could be engineered without a single blow. They embedded rules into narratives, morals into rituals, and obedience into rites of passage. Children learned from birth what was safe, what was forbidden, and how to internalize the hierarchy. Questioning was punished. Curiosity was diverted or suppressed. And any anomaly, a child like the girl, was neutralized before it could disrupt the system. This is why her execution was so carefully staged. It was not only about fear, it was about preservation. A single spark of awareness could ignite countless minds. And those who guard the structures of power know this instinctively. Fire teaches obedience faster than argument ever could. Flames imprint lessons on the subconscious. And yet, awareness has a stubborn persistence that defies even fire. Think of it. Every tradition, every law, every moral code you encounter is a descendant of this ancestral architecture. It has been refined over millennia, tested and adapted to maintain control over human behavior. And just as the girl's eyes never closed, the system has eyes too. It watches, measures, and adjusts, ensuring that compliance remains the path of least resistance. And now, the crucial question. Can you see it? Can you trace the threads that bind society, culture, and mind across centuries? Or will you remain another obedient participant, blinded by the rituals that were designed to keep you unaware? Because once you see the architecture, once you understand the mechanisms, everything changes. You are no longer merely a citizen, a student, a worker. You are a witness. And witnesses cannot be controlled as easily as the unaware. Ritual is older than memory. It predates law, armies, and even cities. Its original purpose was survival, to teach, to unite, to ensure cooperation. But over time, it evolved into something darker, a tool of subtle control, designed to shape the mind before the mind could resist. The girl understood this instinctively. She felt the invisible weight of ritual long before the flames consumed her. Every chant, every ceremony, every social expectation is a rehearsal for obedience. They train the mind to accept authority, not through logic, but through repetition, rhythm, and consequence. Look around today. Modern society is saturated with these rituals. Corporate hierarchies, bureaucratic procedures, performance metrics, social norms, digital notifications. They are all carefully engineered practices. Each one shapes behavior, conditions attention, and channels desire. Fear and reward are woven together so seamlessly that most never notice the strings. And the patterns are everywhere. In schools, children are trained to raise hands, recite scripts, and follow schedules. In workplaces, adults are conditioned to comply, measure success through arbitrary metrics, and compete for approval. Online, algorithms manipulate attention, creating incentives to conform, to like, to fear deviation. Obedience has been modernized, systematized, and anonymized. The girl's death was an early example of these principles in their rawest form. The pyre was a ritualized display of consequence. Her burning was meant to teach without explanation, to enforce compliance without discussion. And it worked, at least for those who had not yet seen beyond the ritual. But for the few who could observe patterns, who could perceive the invisible rules, it became a lesson in awakening rather than a warning. The psychological effect is profound. Ritual creates internal surveillance. People learn to monitor themselves, to anticipate punishment before it arrives, to avoid curiosity before it blooms. The mind becomes its own jailer. And this is why the machinery of power is so resilient. It does not need enforcers in every room. The rituals themselves carry authority, embedding obedience into thought, emotion, and instinct. Now, pay attention. These rituals are not harmless. They shape the very structure of thought. They decide what questions are safe, which desires are acceptable, which fears are justified. And once internalized, they make people complicit in their own subjugation. The girl understood this before her death. She saw how control is maintained quietly, invisibly, and inescapably, and why unblinking eyes are the most dangerous weapon of all. Fear is ancient, older than kingdoms, older than kings, older than scripture. It predates civilization itself, because survival once depended on recognizing danger. But fear, when harnessed, can be weaponized, transformed from instinct into control. The girl understood this before the flames touched her. She saw how fear could be ritualized, measured, and enforced, not only to protect, but to dominate. Ancient societies used fire, exile, and blood to create obedience. The pyre, the whipping post, the public trial, these were instruments of psychological architecture. They taught the mind to internalize authority, to anticipate punishment, to accept hierarchy as natural. And those who resisted were removed, not merely to punish them, but to calibrate the compliance of others. Modern institutions have inherited this architecture, though the tools are different. Physical fire has been replaced by surveillance, algorithms, bureaucracy, social shaming, and carefully curated narratives. Fear is subtle now. It whispers in your inbox, lingers in your social feeds, nudges your thoughts, and manipulates your perception of safety, morality, and desire. The principles remain unchanged. Measure the mind, shape the behavior, reward conformity, punish curiosity. The lineage is clay. Every ritual of obedience today has its ancestor in the same patterns that consumed the girl. The structures are more sophisticated, but the core mechanism remains: fear, repetition, and ritualized reinforcement. Institutions survive not because they are fair or moral, but because they refine these tools to perfection. They know that the mind is more easily guided than the body is forced. And this is why her story matters, not as tragedy, but as revelation. The girl's unblinking eyes are a symbol of awareness piercing centuries of control. She understood something most never do, that the system does not have to show its hands to hold power, that the machinery of fear is invisible yet omnipresent, that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Now, reflect carefully. The unblinking gaze is not just hers. It can become yours. Observation is the first rebellion. Awareness is the first resistance. And the moment you recognize the architecture, the moment you trace the lineage from ancient pyres to modern algorithms, you step into a dangerous truth. A truth few are prepared to face, and even fewer survive unchanged. Control does not need to confront you directly. Its most effective weapon is far more intimate. It resides inside your own mind. From the day you are born, systems begin shaping your perception, your desires, your fears, your sense of self. Most people never notice it. Most live their entire lives under invisible influence, believing their choices are entirely their own. The girl saw this instinctively. She recognized that the village's obedience was not only enforced externally but internalized. They carried the rules within themselves. Every glance, every hesitation, every whispered doubt was monitored, not by the authorities, but by the people themselves. And this is the genius of control. Once it is internalized, enforcement is automatic. The mind becomes both prisoner and warden. Modern life is no different. Schools, corporations, governments, social networks, even families, they all operate as extensions of the same psychological architecture. They reward conformity. They punish dissent, often invisibly, through exclusion, shame, or subtle manipulation. Every ritual, every expectation, every algorithm nudges you toward obedience. And you comply, often without recognizing the influence. The girl's fire was a blunt instrument. Today, the chains are invisible. They wrap around your thoughts, your emotions, your sense of identity. Fear is subtle, curiosity is discouraged, and the system rewards automatic compliance. Your mind is mapped before you realize it, and your choices are shaped before you even question them. Her unblinking eyes are not just a symbol of resistance, they are a warning. Awareness is the first step, but once awakened, it becomes a responsibility. You cannot live passively when you see the machinery. You cannot participate unconsciously when you understand the strings that guide behavior. Observation becomes rebellion. Insight becomes danger, for you and for the systems that rely on your compliance. And now, if you are still listening, write this phrase twice in the comments. I am no longer blind. Let it resonate. Let it mark the threshold. Because what comes next will take you deeper than you have ever gone, into the hidden architecture of faith, ritual, and obedience, and into the truths that most will never face. Internalized fear is more powerful than any chains. It infiltrates the mind, shaping decisions, desires, and the very sense of self. The girl understood this before the pyre. She saw how fear could make people complicit in their own suppression. Once internalized, it no longer requires enforcement. The mind polices itself. Curiosity is stifled before it blooms. Doubt is silenced before it speaks. Obedience becomes instinct. The long-term consequences ripple through generations. Entire societies adopt rituals and traditions not because they serve anyone's well-being, but because they reinforce compliance. People teach these lessons to their children, who teach them to theirs, creating a chain of subconscious submission that few ever question. Fear, normalized and ritualized, becomes invisible, and anyone who awakens to the underlying mechanism is seen as dangerous, a threat to the delicate illusion of order. On an individual level, internalized fear warps perception, emotion, and judgment. People live constrained lives, believing that limitation is virtue, that obedience is morality, that questioning is sin. They sacrifice freedom for comfort, curiosity for safety. And yet, there's always a spark, the unblinking gaze, that reminds them there's more beyond the invisible cage. This is the same spark the girl embodied. Her death was meant to erase it, to extinguish rebellion, to warn others. But it survived, infecting the minds capable of seeing. Her story illustrates a critical truth. The systems that bind humanity rely not on brutality alone, but on subtle, generational conditioning. They do not need to strike directly. The mind becomes both battlefield and captive. The danger, and the lesson, becomes clay. Awareness is liberation, but it also brings responsibility. Once you perceive the mechanisms of control, you can no longer act blindly. You see the invisible strings, the rituals that shape thought, the fear that enforces obedience. And with that perception comes a choice: continue as part of the machine, or step outside it. The unblinking gaze is a call to vigilance. It is an invitation to awaken, to observe, to understand, and to resist. For those who choose awareness, the path is dangerous, isolating, and often lonely. But the alternative, the life guided unconsciously by fear and ritual, is far worse. Control is not static. It is a living, adaptive system. Every time someone resists, every time a mind awakens, every time a spark of awareness ignites, the mechanism learns. It evolves. It mutates. It becomes more sophisticated, more subtle, more pervasive. The girl's death was an iteration, a blunt, terrifying display. But today, the machinery operates with precision that would have seemed miraculous to the villagers who burned her. Systems of control measure human behavior constantly. They test compliance, identify anomalies, and reinforce conformity. In the past, it was fire, public shaming, exile. Today, it is algorithms, psychological manipulation, surveillance, and social engineering. The methods change, but the principle remains unchanged. Shape perception, engineer obedience, and eliminate or neutralize those who see too clearly. The girl's unblinking eyes are warning across centuries. Systems fear the observer. Every time awareness spreads, control adapts. Entire cultures, institutions, and societies have been built to suppress curiosity, limit critical thought, and reward submission. And the most terrifying part, people do it willingly. They internalize the rules, the rituals, the expectations, and enforce them themselves. The machine polices itself through fear and reward. Adaptation ensures survival. Lessons are learned from every rebellion, every question, every gaze that refused to look away. The system catalogs what works and what fails. It embeds new rituals, new narratives, new forms of subtle enforcement. And for those who awaken, the chains are invisible yet undeniable. Yet even as control adapts, one truth persists. Knowledge is the spark that cannot be extinguished. Awareness cannot be entirely contained. And that is why her story endures. Every generation has its pyres, its tests, its rituals. Every generation has those who step outside the narrative, unblinking, seeing the machinery for what it is. And now, take a moment. Reflect on how many of these adaptive mechanisms are present in your life, in your work, in your society, in your thoughts. Awareness is not passive. It is a weapon. and those who understand it can choose to either remain captive or step beyond the system entirely. Education does not guarantee awareness. Intelligence does not grant freedom. In fact, the most sophisticated minds are often the easiest to trap, because they are trained to reason within the boundaries the system constructs. The girl understood this instinctively. She knew that even the sharpest mind could be conditioned, disciplined, and guided without noticing the strings that bind it. The system employs psychological traps everywhere. They are subtle, invisible, and nearly impossible to detect unless you are looking for them. Confirmation bias, social proof, authority bias, ritualized repetition, all tools to channel thought without force. People think they are reasoning freely, but the system has already framed the questions, highlighted the correct answers, and rewarded compliance. Curiosity is optional, obedience mandatory. Even skepticism can be redirected. Doubt is allowed only within boundaries that do not threaten the architecture of control. Question one rule, and you are praised as inquisitive. Question the foundation itself, and you are ostracized, shamed, or silenced. Most people never reach that point. Most minds remain contained within the invisible walls of expectation and ritual. The girl's eyes never closed because she had stepped outside the frame. She saw the traps, the nudges, the hidden hierarchies that dictated behavior. And that made her dangerous, not because she opposed anyone overtly, but because she threatened the subtle mechanisms of control that operate without anyone noticing. Awareness alone was enough to unsettle the system. And here's the lesson for you. The traps are everywhere. In classrooms, offices, media, politics, relationships. Invisible, normalized, and so deeply embedded that even those who pride themselves on thinking critically are ensnared. Awareness is the first escape. Observation is the first rebellion. The second is understanding the architecture and refusing to participate passively. The fire that once consumed the girl was intended to teach obedience. Today, the traps are quieter, subtler, and more dangerous, but the principle is the same. Fear, reward, ritual, and manipulation continue to guide millions who never see the machinery behind their choices. And for those who do, the path forward is no longer about survival alone. It is about liberation. Look around. The fire is gone, but the machinery remains. Rituals persist, not in empires or towers, but in offices, classrooms, and screens. Social approval, digital validation, daily routines, they are the modern equivalents of the pyre. The goal is the same: compliance, obedience, the quiet, unthinking perpetuation of the system. Media is a ritual of perception. Every story, headline, and image nudges thought, shapes fear, and reinforces hierarchy. It rewards conformity and punishes curiosity through subtle cues. Likes, shares, ridicule, marginalization. News becomes ritualized indoctrination. Repetition creates belief, and dissent is isolated. Just as the villagers learned obedience through observation of fire, modern societies learn it through observation of reward and consequence. Social systems, too, carry the weight of invisible chains. Families, workplaces, schools, all enforce norms subtly, rewarding compliance and punishing deviation. Rituals of etiquette, hierarchy, and status function as mechanisms to internalize authority. People monitor themselves and each other without conscious coercion. Fear is embedded so deeply it becomes instinct. The girl's unblinking gaze is a mirror. She saw the ritual of control clearly, and her awareness threatened the invisible structure. In modern terms, she represents the mind that perceives patterns others ignore, the consciousness capable of stepping outside collective conditioning. That perspective is dangerous to the system, because systems depend on minds that never see the strings. And the most dangerous lesson of all, this architecture adapts. When one ritual becomes ineffective, it is replaced. When one method of fear or reward fails, a more subtle one takes its place. Systems do not collapse, they evolve, refining the machinery of compliance. And those who see are always outnumbered, always scrutinized, always tested. Your challenge, now, is recognition. To notice the rituals, the manipulations, the structures that have conditioned behavior for centuries. Awareness is not enough. You must see the invisible mechanisms in play, and refuse to participate unconsciously. The girl's gaze is your template, unblinking, penetrating, relentless. Power has rules. Unspoken, invisible, and ancient. They are not written in books, preached in sermons, or debated in parliaments. They are encoded in human behavior, reinforced by ritual, and transmitted through fae. The girl saw them before she died. Her unblinking eyes were the witness to these laws. Laws designed not to punish, but to perpetuate control. Rule 1. Always control perception. The truth is never as important as the story people believe. If the masses see what you want them to see, the machinery hums quietly in the background. Disrupt perception, and the system trembles. Her gaze threatened that balance. Rule 2. Internalize obedience. The most effective chains are invisible, felt in the mind rather than applied to the body. Teach compliance subtly. Reward conformity. Punish curiosity. By the time the village pyre was lit, obedience had already been fully internalized. Most villagers would enforce it on themselves and each other without further prompting. Rule 3. Ritualize fae. Make punishment ceremonial, repetitive, and symbolic. Fae is not random. It is measured, calibrated, and delivered with precision. The pyre was not just fire. It was theater, a demonstration of consequence, a lesson encoded into memory and repeated across generations. Modern equivalents exist everywhere. Social shaming, algorithmic judgment, curated media. Fear is ritualized to guide behavior quietly and consistently. Rule 4. Adapt and refine. Systems do not remain static. Every failure, every rebellion, every spark of awareness teaches the machine how to evolve. The mechanisms of control grow subtler, more sophisticated, more pervasive. They learn to anticipate resistance, to redirect curiosity, to punish without leaving obvious scars. The chains become invisible, yet unbreakable unless awareness intervenes. Rule 5. Punish the observer. Those who see the architecture threaten stability. They cannot be ignored. They must be neutralized, marginalized, or destroyed, physically, socially, or psychologically. Her death was not just punishment. It was an attempt to preserve the system by eliminating the mind that could perceive it fully. And here's the truth most men never realize. These rules are not confined to the past. They operate today, in offices, schools, social media, governments, and cultural systems. Fae, ritual, perception, adaptation. They remain the foundation of obedience. The machinery has evolved, but the principles are eternal. The girl's eyes never closed because she understood them all. And now, if you are paying attention, so must you. Awareness of these rules is the first step to stepping outside their influence. Once you see them, the world cannot manipulate you as easily. But seeing is dangerous. Seeing changes everything. Obedience thrives not on fear alone, but on coordination. Systems understand this. Humans are social creatures, wired to conform. When one individual obeys, others follow. When one hesitates, doubt spreads. And the girl knew this intuitively. The fire was not just punishment for her. It was a lesson for the collective, a carefully calculated demonstration designed to synchronize minds into compliance. Modern society employs the same principle. Reward structures, social recognition, groupthink, peer pressure. All are subtle, invisible instruments of control. You do not need to be threatened directly. You are influenced by the anticipation of judgment, by the weight of expectation, by the fear of exclusion. People enforce compliance on themselves, silently, without ever realizing they are part of the system. The machinery works in layers. Rituals create habits. Rewards reinforce obedience. Fear enforces boundaries. Narratives shape perception. Every action is measured against these invisible standards, and the system adjusts accordingly. Deviance is noted, curiosity is curtailed, conformity is amplified, and because the system is internalized, most people become willing participants in their own subjugation. Her unblinking eyes were proof that awareness cannot be extinguished, even when the machine is precise and merciless. Observation alone threatens stability. And this is why those who see patterns beyond the surface are marginalized, shamed, or eliminated. The system defends itself not with brute force alone, but by neutralizing perception. Consider your own life. How often have you followed instructions, habits, or expectations without questioning the underlying architecture? How often has fear of judgment, exclusion, failure, or shame, guided your actions more than logic or desire? Every ritual, every repetition, every subtle nudge is a thread in the web. And the girl understood this. The strings are everywhere, and those who see them are rare. The lesson is clear. The machinery of compliance thrives on subtlety. It relies on collective reinforcement, internalized fear, and invisible narratives. And once you perceive these mechanisms, you begin to step outside them. Observation becomes rebellion. Awareness becomes liberation. But the system will resist. It will test you. It will attempt to pull you back into obedience. Freedom comes with a price. The moment you step outside the invisible boundaries of obedience, you feel it. Isolation, doubt, discomfort, fear. The machinery is relentless in its attempt to pull you back, and the mind struggles against the weight of internalized conditioning. The girl experienced this in her final moments, not only physically, but psychologically. She had seen the strings. She had understood the architecture, and that clarity made her both powerful and vulnerable. Breaking free from internalized control is not a single act. It is a continuous struggle against habits, fears, and rituals that have been reinforced for decades, centuries, even millennia. Every instinct that once guided obedience becomes a challenge. Every expectation, every social norm, every internalized ritual becomes a test. The mind recoils. The body resists. The world pushes back. And yet, this is the path of awakening. Modern life hides this struggle behind layers of comfort and distraction. The machinery has evolved to make conformity easy, rewarding, and nearly automatic. The moment you attempt to step outside, subtle pressures emerge. Social disapproval, professional risk, self-doubt. Even the most intelligent and skeptical minds are affected. The resistance is invisible, yet it is as real as any pyre. The girl's eyes never closed because she embraced the cost of seeing. Awareness is dangerous. It isolates you. It forces you to confront uncomfortable truths. It challenges every assumption you have been taught to accept. And that is why systems of control fear it so intensely. Those who awaken do not simply conform. They question, disrupt, and inspire observation in others. This is your warning. Awakening is not painless. The world, and your own mind, will resist. Habits will pull you back. Rituals will seduce you with comfort. Fear will whisper that compliance is safer. And yet, the spark that unblinking eyes represent, the spark of insight, is enough to ignite transformation. To move forward, you must embrace discomfort. You must recognize the chains that bind your thoughts. You must accept that stepping outside the system will bring resistance, isolation, and struggle. The path is dangerous, but the alternative, living unconscious, bound by fear and ritual, is far worse. Awareness is not passive. It is not a gentle curiosity. It is a weapon. The moment you perceive the machinery of control, the rituals, the fear, the subtle nudges, the internalized obedience, you gain the power to act differently. You can no longer participate unconsciously. Every choice, every reaction, every perception becomes deliberate. And that terrifies the system, because the obedient are predictable, but the aware are not. The girl understood this instinctively. Her gaze, unblinking and clear, revealed the architecture of authority. She saw the rituals of fear, the patterns of manipulation, the invisible chains that bound every mind around her. And that knowledge was more dangerous than any fire. It allowed her to resist in ways the villagers could not anticipate. Her awareness disrupted the system, not through rebellion, not through violence, but simply through perception. In modern terms, this is the essence of liberation. Once you see the patterns that shape behavior, reward compliance, and punish dissent, you begin to operate outside them. Observation becomes resistance. Insight becomes power. And the chains of internalized control weaken because they rely on ignorance and invisibility. But this power is double-edged. Awareness isolates. It makes you uncomfortable. It forces you to confront truths most avoid. It turns familiar institutions, friends, and norms into potential instruments of manipulation. Yet this discomfort is the proof of liberation. The spark that unblinking eyes represent is alive, and it cannot be extinguished unless you choose to close them. Every act of observation, every question asked, every narrative challenge strengthens the weapon of awareness. You cannot fully control the world, but you can control your perception of it. You can see beyond the scripts, the rituals, the fear. You can anticipate manipulation before it affects you. And in doing so, you shift from being a passive participant to an active force, a mind the system cannot easily predict or constrain. Her eyes never closed, and neither can yours, if you wish to step beyond. Awareness is not safe. It is not comfortable. But it is the first and only step toward true freedom. The system fears it because the awakened mind cannot be owned, measured, or molded. It sees. And seeing is resistance. Control does not exist in isolation. It is a network, a lattice of influence stretching across generations, societies, and continents. The girls' village was a microcosm of this. The elders, the rituals, the pyre, they were local nodes of a far larger architecture, one that extends silently, invisibly, into every corner of human civilization. Power is not singular. It is systemic, interconnected, and self-reinforcing. Consider the institutions that shape perception today: governments, corporations, media empires, financial networks, education systems, religious hierarchies. Each operates independently, yet all serve the same principle: maintain compliance, normalize obedience, and suppress awareness. Information is curated. Narratives are shaped. Fear is measured. Social pressure is amplified. And even those who believe they are free operate within invisible boundaries designed by this network. The girl's eyes never closed because she recognized the structure, not just the individual enforcers, but the system itself. She saw how a single spark of insight could destabilize the network, how knowledge spreads like fire, and how obedience is only effective as long as perception is guided. Awareness, even in one person, threatens the continuity of control. These networks are adaptive. They learn from resistance. They evolve with technology, culture, and psychology. Modern tools, surveillance, algorithms, media manipulation, are simply the latest instruments in a long line of human ingenuity devoted to shaping behavior. But the principle remains eternal. Control is most effective when invisible, subtle, and internalized. And here's the danger and the revelation for those who awaken. Understanding the network does not make it powerless. It makes it visible. Once you see the connections, the rituals, the reinforcement, you can no longer participate unconsciously. You can observe, anticipate, and navigate the architecture of influence. And in doing so, you reclaim a measure of power that obedience had stolen. Her gaze, unblinking and penetrating, is a map, not of geography, but of influence. It shows you where the strings run, where fear is cultivated, and where compliance is enforced. Once you follow those lines, you cannot unsee them. Awareness becomes strategy, observation becomes armor, and insight becomes the most dangerous weapon in a world built on submission. Control thrives not only in action but in identity. Before fear can bind behavior, it must shape the self. The girl understood this instinctively. The elders did not just demand obedience, they demanded allegiance to a version of reality carefully constructed, one that defined who people were allowed to be, what they were allowed to desire, and which truths they were permitted to recognize. Loyalty is manufactured. It is not always earned. It is engineered. Rituals, stories, and symbols create attachments that feel natural but are calculated to maintain the system. From childhood, individuals are trained to identify with groups, traditions, and authorities. They internalize roles, adopt narratives, and measure worth according to obedience. Once internalized, these identities enforce compliance silently, without need for visible chains. Perception is the keystone. What people see, what they believe, and what they assume to be real, all are meticulously curated. The girl's unblinking eyes were dangerous because they saw the scaffolding behind the facade. She understood that perception could be manipulated as thoroughly as behavior, and that loyalty could be redirected, broken, or exploited. This is why her existence threatened the system. She perceived the architecture and refused to conform. In modern society, the methods are familiar. Branding, ideology, media narratives, social approval. These are the contemporary rituals of allegiance. People police themselves, enforcing conformity on peers, families, and even themselves. Fear, reward, and expectation are internalized into identity, making rebellion not only uncomfortable but nearly impossible without conscious effort. And yet, the insight she represents is simple. When identity and perception are manipulated, freedom becomes an illusion. Obedience becomes instinctive. Loyalty becomes automatic. And most minds never question the architecture shaping them. To awaken is to see the strings, to recognize the rituals, and to reclaim the autonomy of thought and self. Her gaze, unblinking and unwavering, is a call. Observe the structures that define you. Question the loyalties you've internalized, and recognize the narratives that guide perception. Only then can you step outside the system that has quietly claimed your mind. Awareness is not passive. It is an act of reclamation, and one of the most dangerous weapons in a world built on obedience. Control thrives on emotion. Fear is the obvious lever, but desire is far more potent. The girl understood this intuitively. The elders did not just punish, they promised reward. They offered approval, status, and belonging to those who conformed. They manipulated longing and attachment as efficiently as they wielded fear. Obedience is not sustained by terror alone. It is balanced by the lure of desire. Modern systems operate identically. Approval, recognition, social validation, career advancement, even digital likes and follows, all are engineered to shape behavior. People act not only to avoid punishment but to pursue reward. Their choices, habits, and identities are guided by a careful calibration of emotional incentives. Compliance becomes instinctive, internalized, and self-reinforcing. The danger lies in subtlety. Desire masks control. Fear is visible, reward is seductive. The girl's unblinking eyes were dangerous because she could see both. She understood that those who manipulate emotion can guide not just action, but perception, thought, and identity. They do not need to command. They need only to offer the right combination of fear and reward. The mind becomes complicit in its own subjugation. This is why even intelligent, skeptical individuals are vulnerable. Emotions bypass logic. Desire reinforces conformity. Social conditioning ensures that obedience feels like choice. The architecture of influence operates below conscious awareness, steering decisions long before reasoning engages. Awareness is the only safeguard, but it is difficult, isolating, and requires deliberate effort to maintain. The lesson is relentless. Systems endure because they master the human psyche. Fear, ritual, reward, and desire are tools, expertly calibrated to shape thought, behavior, and identity simultaneously. The girl's death was intended as a warning. Her gaze, unblinking and aware, reminds us that insight alone can pierce the veil of manipulation, but only if the mind resists its own instincts. Now, recognize this in your life. Every desire shaped, every fear instilled, every longing rewarded. It may be part of a larger mechanism you cannot yet see. Awareness of this psychological architecture is not passive. It is your first weapon against the invisible levers that have long guided human behavior. The unblinking gaze is your model. See the mechanism, understand the levers, and refuse to be manipulated. Knowledge is the ultimate weapon. Awareness of the hidden structures that govern behavior, identity, and perception transforms fear into understanding and manipulation into strategy. The girl's unblinking eyes were not just a symbol. They were an embodiment of this power. She saw the machinery of control clearly, and that clarity made her untouchable, even in death. Once you perceive the invisible chains, you gain choice. Compliance becomes optional. Ritual loses its grip. Fear loses its intensity. Knowledge illuminates patterns that once operated unseen, allowing you to act with intention rather than reflex. And the moment you recognize these patterns, you step outside the collective obedience that ensnares so many. The machinery may still exist, but it cannot dominate you in the same way. This is liberation, but it is not easy. Knowledge carries responsibility. Awareness isolates. Observing the system exposes manipulation that others do not see, and it places you in a position of constant vigilance. The world continues to operate under the same principles of fear, ritual, and reward, but now you see them for what they are. And seeing changes everything. The girl's story is a roadmap. Her unblinking gaze teaches that insight alone is a form of resistance. Understanding the levers of emotion, identity, and social enforcement allows you to anticipate manipulation, navigate rituals of obedience, and reclaim authority over your own mind. Knowledge converts subtle control into a field you can observe and influence, rather than a force that controls you. And this power extends beyond the individual. Awareness is contagious. When one person perceives patterns others ignore, questions narratives others accept, and resists conditioning others follow, the system is exposed and weakened. The unblinking eyes do not merely witness, they teach, inspire, and ignite the spark of clarity in others. Your choice is clear: remain blind, obedient, and guided, or embrace knowledge as liberation. The machinery of control may continue to operate around you, but once you understand its architecture, it can no longer own your perception. And that is the first step toward reclaiming freedom, the same step the Gale took with unflinching courage. When enough unblinking eyes awaken, the system begins to tremble. Control relies on ignorance, on obedience, on minds that never question. The girl's death was a warning to prevent exactly this. A single spark could spread, and sparks accumulate. The machinery of power is resilient, but not invincible. Awareness multiplies, networks fracture, narratives unravel, and obedience falters. Societies are held together by rituals, fear, and reinforced perception. When large numbers begin to see the invisible threads, the structures built to enforce conformity begin to wobble. Questions that were once unthinkable emerge. Collective doubt spreads silently, undermining authority before anyone notices. Even small disruptions ripple outward, revealing cracks that generations of ritual, fear, and reward had concealed. The danger to those in power is existential. Systems survive by anticipating resistance, neutralizing observers, and adapting to new forms of control. But widespread awakening cannot be suppressed forever. Each individual who perceives, questions, and resists becomes a node of influence. Awareness spreads faster than ritual, faster than fear, faster than punishment. And as more eyes refuse to close, the architecture begins to collapse from within. The girl's unblinking gaze is the blueprint. It demonstrates that perception is the first battlefield. Knowledge, awareness, and observation are the weapons that can destabilize entrenched hierarchies. When the machinery encounters enough minds that refuse to comply, it cannot maintain its control silently. The system reacts, sometimes violently, sometimes subtly, but always revealing its fragility. And here's the harsh truth. Awakening is not just personal, it is collective. The systems that control perception, identity, and behavior are designed to operate on mass compliance. When masses awaken, the rules of obedience no longer function. Rituals lose meaning. Fear loses potency. Loyalty is questioned. And the world begins to shift, often unpredictably, as the architecture of control is exposed and challenged. Her story is a warning, but also a roadmap. One mind awakens, then another, and then the system must either adapt or crumble. The unblinking gaze is contagious, and the consequences of widespread awareness are profound, irreversible, and terrifying to those who rely on obedience for power. Awareness is not a gift without obligation. The moment you see the machinery of control, you inherit responsibility. The girl's unblinking eyes were more than witness, they were a call to action. She knew that to perceive without response is a form of complicity. To observe without choice is still submission. Seeing clearly requires courage, vigilance, and deliberate engagement. Responsibility begins with the self. Internalized obedience must be recognized and challenged. Fear, ritual, and desire, once understood, must be navigated consciously. Every habit, every assumption, every impulse guided by hidden structures must be examined. You cannot remain passive. Awareness demands that you act with clarity, even when it isolates you, even when the system resists. Responsibility extends outward. Knowledge of manipulation, perception, and control is not meant for hoarding. The girl's gaze serves as a beacon, a warning, and an invitation. Observers can illuminate patterns for others, reveal hidden levers, and awaken minds trapped in compliance. Influence becomes ethical only when paired with deliberate insight and restraint. Misuse of this understanding is another form of tyranny. The cost is real. Isolation, ridicule, and conflict accompany the conscious refusal to obey unconsciously. Friends, family, institutions, they will challenge, mock, or pressure you to return to compliance. Every act of insight carries resistance. Yet, this is the burden and the power of unblinking awareness. It is dangerous, but it is also liberating. The girl's story teaches a singular truth. To see clearly is to inherit the duty of vigilance. Observation alone is insufficient. Understanding alone is insufficient. The mind that awakens must also choose how to act, how to resist subtle control, and how to navigate a world built for compliance. Her eyes never closed, and neither can yours, if you intend to uphold the freedom that awareness grants. The unblinking gaze is your standard, your mirror, and your responsibility. To perceive is to inherit power. To inherit power is to bear the weight of choice. And in that choice lies the potential to reclaim autonomy, influence others, and disrupt the invisible chains that have bound humanity for generations. Everything you have seen, heard, and felt in this journey leads to this moment. The girl's story is not just a tale of horror. It is a blueprint, a warning, and a call to awaken. Her unblinking eyes reflect the truth that systems of control, fear, and ritual rely entirely on the blind, the compliant, and the unaware. Once the eyes see, the machinery falters. Once perception pierces the veil, obedience is no longer automatic. The lessons are simple, yet dangerous. Observe relentlessly, question everything, understand the invisible levers of influence, recognize the rituals that shape thought, and refuse to internalize fear or loyalty dictated by others. Awareness is your weapon, insight your shield, and vigilance your path. The machinery will test you at every step, because it cannot tolerate the unblinking gaze. But this is more than survival, it is transformation. The mind that sees becomes autonomous, resilient, and strategic. You are no longer a pawn in rituals, routines, or narratives that others construct. You are the observer and the participant, the strategist and the witness. The fire that once consumed the girl is now a mirror for your own mind, a reminder of what compliance costs and what freedom demands. And now, remember this, the unblinking gaze is contagious. It spreads quietly through observation, through insight, through the courage to resist manipulation. Each mind awakened strengthens the architecture of freedom. Each person who refuses the chains becomes a node of disruption in the system. You carry that responsibility now. You cannot unsee what has been revealed. The choice is no longer theoretical. So ask yourself, will you close your eyes, comforted by obedience, or will you remain unblinking, aware, and vigilant? Will you walk the path of insight, even when it isolates, challenges, and confronts every ritualized chain in your life? The girl's eyes never closed. Yours must not either. This is the threshold. Awareness is not passive. It is power. It is rebellion. It is liberation. And from this moment forward, nothing and no one can demand your compliance without your conscious consent. The pyre may still burn in stories. The rituals may still persist. But you have seen. You have understood. You have inherited the gaze that changes everything. The world is no longer as it was. You are no longer as you were. The eyes are open. The chains are visible. The journey begins, not with fear, but with clarity. And the fire that once consumed the innocent now illuminates the path forward, for those unafraid to see, unafraid to question, and unafraid to remain unblinking.